So this paper came out last month, but it's now doing the rounds on social media, the AI layoff trap. Now, the reason that I wanted to make this video, the entire purpose is to dispel some of the, let's just say, heartburn that it's causing. So the kind of the primary pinch point is that they say only a Pigouvian automation tax can solve the problem of the AI layoff trap. Now, without bearing the lead, the AI layoff trap is the idea that there is a prisoner's dilemma where the optimal policy for all businesses is not to automate faster than the economy can adapt. So they're saying, okay, automation is coming. The optimal policy is to slow down full automation with an automation tax, and that's the only thing that can do it. So I can understand why some people on the techno-optimist side and the accelerationist side of things are saying that this is, anti-AI doomerism and that sort of thing. But I wanted to give you a little bit better of an intuition of this paper and also explain why I fully agree with their modeling of the problem. I don't fully agree with the solution, so let's get into it. The core intuition of this paper is that you can view full automation as a prisoner's dilemma. So the prisoner's dilemma is basically you have multiple competing parties. In the simplest version, you have two competing parties and where you can either defect or stay loyal. In this case, they frame defection as everyone just automates as quickly as possible because that's what the market demands. That is what free markets will drive people towards, because if your competitors automate, then you have to automate in order to keep up. So then the goal, the attractor basin, is towards maximum automation. Whatever you can automate, you will automate. The problem is that automation results in people being laid off. And of course, people are tracking AI-based layoffs now. And the more people you lay off, the fewer customers and consumers you have. So this is why it is called a prisoner's dilemma, because the optimal strategy, so there's a Nash equilibrium where the strategy that everyone picks is automate as much as possible, but that ends up creating a market in which they have also no consumers. So this is what I've been calling the deflationary death spiral, where the more you automate to lower costs, the more you lay off people, but people then can't afford those cheaper goods and services because you've laid people off. And so therefore the companies actually have less revenue, so they have to lay more people off, and the government has less tax revenue because there's less payroll, and on and on and on and on. So that is the deflationary death spiral, as I call it. They call it the AI layoff trap. They have modeled, and we are in 100% agreement that this is a central risk to the economy. Now, of course, any time that people say that technology is a risk to humanity or the economy, it is often framed as doomerism or, anti-AI slop or propaganda or a psyop or whatever. So I'm in flat disagreement with the techno-optimist side of the internet on that read. And I'm going to say that this is actually techno-optimism, because they're saying, hey, look, we've actually modeled that full automation is not only possible, it could happen at such a fast rate that it could be highly disruptive. Fully agree there. And then to keep things in a realistic frame, this represents an existential threat to many people's livelihoods and careers. The one place where I really fervently disagree with this paper is that they're saying that there is one and only one solution that can head this off at the pass, and that is basically taxing automation at a rate that's high enough and universal enough across the board to slow down automation so that the economy can adapt. Now, that is a vast oversimplification. They also, their view is diametrically opposed to mine, where they say that only tax-based programs, so that's a transfer-based program, can offset this. They say that capital cannot offset it. But when you look carefully, they're showing that capital gains taxes can't offset it. That's not when I talk about in post-labor economics, where we have to magnify household income with capital income, that's not capital gains taxes. Capital gains tax is still fundamentally a transfer-based program where you tax one person and give it to someone else. So they're not fully conceiving post-labor economics as I would push it, as I have framed it. But in the grand scheme of things, there's a lot of agreement. So what I want to do is I want to unpack, okay, so I've given you the whole picture. What I want to do now is unpack why I don't think this is doomerism, and why I think it's actually good news in the grand scheme of things. So number one, doomerism is, if in the context of AI, this is, I usually reserve doomerism for X risk people, for people who say that human extinction is the most likely and inevitable outcome, which I'm just going to say is delusional, right? These are the same people that are now attacking Sam Altman's home twice, in case you haven't heard the news. Uh, and what has AI actually done? It's mostly helpful, right? Like, yes, some people have used AI, like, Anthropic and Palantir for military actions, but it hasn't gone rogue. It hasn't demonstrated that it wants to go rogue. And when you take a closer look at all of the Anthropic papers and studies that say it escaped, it's like they actually had to work pretty hard to get Claude to try and escape. And they basically select the edge cases and use it for maximum fear. This is what the internet is really coming to realize, is that Anthropic uses fear as a marketing tactic, which is extremely disingenuous. And if you're not terminally online like I am, and I really wish that I wasn't, but that's what happens when you have chronic illness, I have seen the internet broadly sour on Anthropic. So they were enjoying a short-term high, a sugar high, from going toe-to-toe with the Pentagon. They lost soundly. Now, to be fair, the courts have blocked some of the things that the Trump administration wants to do, but it has yet to be fully litigated. Meanwhile, they're losing out on business. They're losing out on market share. They are overtaking OpenAI, which I think is great news. OpenAI needs a slice of humble pie. Sam Altman definitely needs a slice of humble pie. And that's what OpenAI gets for trying to, create social media slop with Sora instead of focusing on a good product. But that's a tangent. I digress. So the point here, though, sorry, I let myself get very derailed there. The point here, though, is that doomerism is a specific brand of techno-pessimism. And it is a delusional kind of techno-pessimism where it is divorced from evidence. It is divorced from actual reason and logic, even though they say they're rationalists. They're not actually rationalists. Here's what I mean by that. One of the things that rationalists do is they fetishize Bayesian theory. So Bayesian network theory is basically, look at the probability of something happening and make a probability tree. Well, the thing is, you have to use base rates and priors to do that. So one, we have no priors for the things that they are talking about. But also, if they were to apply Bayesian reasoning to their own track record is near zero. So basically, if you apply the theory, the mathematical treatise that they fetishize to their own performance, then the Bayesian network, the Bayesian graph would say, okay, how often are rationalists or X-risk people right? They're right, maybe 5% of the time. So therefore, 95% of the time, they're wrong on even little stuff, let alone big stuff. So if you apply the Bayesian rationalist viewpoint to themselves, which they seem immune to, they're like, no, we're just constantly updating and we're getting more accurate all the time, but they've been inaccurate forever. So it's like, okay, so they say that their P-doom is 20 to 50%, but their base rate of accuracy is only 5%. Therefore, it's like, okay, it's actually abysmal. The chances that they are at all right is abysmal. So anyways, they're wrong. That's what I mean by delusional, is they lack the self-awareness or the meta self-awareness to figure anything out. The reason that I do not characterize this paper that we just looked at, the AI layoff trap, as doomerism is because, one, it's much more scientifically rigorous. It is based on actual established mechanisms, other researchers, peer-reviewed research, and that sort of thing. And yes, I have my criticisms of the ivory tower. Many people have their criticisms of the ivory tower, but there is a certain level of rigor. There is a certain level of transparency, and there's a certain level of feedback that happens and is integrated in academic discourse. And that integration of feedback is not something that happens in the X-risk community. In fact, they expend a tremendous amount of energy basically justifying why they don't have to take anyone else's feedback other than their own, which of course is the antithesis of consensus. That is the antithesis of actual intellectual discourse, is the ability to take pushback, to take feedback, and take criticism, especially from people who disagree with you. So when in this other paper, the AI layoff trap, they say, okay, let's cite all of these other people. Granted, it's a narrative. Every piece of scientific literature, unless or until it is, accepted as general consensus, as a broadly accepted theory, it is still conjecture, it is still a narrative, and that's fine. But they did also include the maths, they included the models, they included some of the history, not as much, although the citations and the literature review that they performed did include those who have looked at the history of everything, looking at the anecdotes, looking at the grounding. So I don't classify this paper as doomerism. I do agree that there is a deflationary trap that is possible. There are those who disagree as to whether or not it will happen too fast. I've had this discussion with professors and economists. There is general agreement that yes, we are heading towards a more automated economy, maybe even a fully automated economy. The primary piece of disagreement, and this is not just professors in the ivory tower, this is business leaders, this is consultants, these are all the people that I've talked to in service of post-labor economics. The question really is how fast it's going to happen, whether it's 5 years or 20 years or 50 years. There is some disagreement over the timelines. And what this paper lays out is a clear mathematical way of understanding how and why automation could happen much faster than the economy can adapt, which I think is a realistic concern. Arguably, you can say that automation and automation-based layoffs have been happening for decades now, and the economy has still failed to adapt. That is why, housing is becoming more unaffordable. That is why we've had the decoupling of labor's share of national income versus corporate income. This is why wages have decoupled from economic growth for the last 4 to 5 decades, is because we've already been on an automation project. It's just that artificial intelligence is expanding the sphere of what can be automated, the frontier of automation, as Anton Koronek calls it. And not only that, the expansion of that frontier is itself accelerating because of the rate at which AI is accelerating. And then, of course, that's before robots even entered the picture, which, of course, robots are on their, they're beginning their exponential ramp up this year. Last year, I think it was like the low 5 figures in terms of total humanoid robots were shipped. And of course, they're not even that capable yet, but their capability is rising very quickly. Anyways, all this is probably stuff that you already know. So I consider this paper optimistic. And so this is a matter of reframing this. I know that it's a matter of narrative construction, but let me reframe this paper. This paper that shows that we could face a potential AI layoff trap, that is a techno-optimist statement if I've ever heard one, because it says, look how powerful AI and automation is. That is exactly what we want to see. We want to see more consensus showing, yes, the upside is there, and the upside is actually so compelling that it creates a prisoner's dilemma where no one can defect from the optimal strategy. The Nash equilibrium is automate fast and hard. That's exactly how we get to post-labor economics. However, I will concede the point that if it happens too fast, Silicon Valley is always in the move fast, break things kind of category. But in this case, it's not even a single choice that Silicon Valley is making. It's not a single choice that a single nation is making. It is the nature of a complex adaptive system. It is a nature of the market. There is no slowing this down. And the optimal strategy for every single nation and every single company is to automate as much as possible, as fast as possible. Now, this is where I think this paper will probably hit stumbling blocks, is because, okay, from a national perspective, the last thing that you want is a huge depression. You don't want massive layoffs. You don't want the economy to come grinding to a halt. On the other hand, the nation also wants to automate as fast as possible. So this paper, what they propose is basically an automation tax to act as friction to slow everything down and start redistributing stuff. Now, I have never been opposed to an automation tax. In fact, if you've watched my channel for any length of time, more than 2 years ago, I was proposing robot taxes and that sort of thing. I do think that an automation tax is a necessary but not sufficient, as a single solution, necessary but not sufficient component of reconfiguring the way that the economy works. Because one thing that you need to remember is that right now, 80 to 85% of the federal government's budget comes from income tax and payroll tax. Well, if people's income goes away and if companies start laying people off, that income tax and payroll tax goes the way of the dinosaurs. So the government's going to have to get funded from somewhere, and it's not going to be from households and payroll and wages and that sort of thing. So it's got to come from companies. It's got to come from corporate taxes. It's got to come from wealth taxes. It's got to come from automation taxes. That is just by process of elimination, like, pardon my language, but no, Sherlock, it's got to come from somewhere, right? So yes, I fully agree that an automation tax is necessary and proper for the future. I will not say that it is singularly sufficient. I think that that is a delusional take. And I'll tell the authors that. That is a delusional take that an automation tax is the one and only possible solution. Now, of course, everyone likes to have their pet solutions, and it's great that they're pushing that narrative. I just think that's a little bit silly and premature. Now, on the other hand, though, again, framing it as techno-optimistic is that, yes, that is the promise of automation. To have a fully automated economy, you need the underlying technology. That is a prerequisite. So, like, imagine you're playing, a grand strategy game or a real-time strategy game, and you've got your research build tree, right? To get to post-labor economics, to get to fully automated luxury space communism, I about said spuggery. That's a spoonerism. Luxury space communism, that requires that you have technology that can obviate the need for human labor. Now, this is where I strongly, vehemently disagree with some of the techno-optimists, namely Marc Andreessen. So Marc Andreessen fetishizes labor. He's like, look, we need labor. We need to work. And this is, there's a few things. So one, he's very clearly caught in the Protestant work ethic, which is that not working is sinful or something. He won't use the term sinful, but he's like, basically, if you don't work, that's bad. That's morally bad. But the thing is, he's also very bullish on automation. And I'm like, you can't have the two. So he tries to reconcile the cognitive dissonance through various ways. And I'm not going to try and read his mind. But from the outside, it definitely looks like cognitive dissonance because he wants maximum automation and somehow believes that maximum automation will create more jobs. Not really sure how that works, but, you do you, buddy. So then you have people who want maximum automation, but then through logical gymnastics and, mental contortion say, but we're going to have more jobs. And I'm like, you're a capitalist. Why do you want labor? Labor is the most expensive dragnet. It's the most expensive anchor on capital returns. So just as an example, in my house, the percentage of your home's cost that comes down to labor is up to 45 or 50% of the cost of your house is labor. If you could replace all that labor with robots and automation and machines, you could lower the cost of housing by up to 50%. That's a lot. We should all want that. Why? Because then housing is cheaper and more affordable. But he's like, no, we must keep humans in the loop. We must give humans something to do. And the thing is like, that is the dystopian status quo. The dystopian status quo is that we're all precarious and we're all dependent upon capitalists to hand us out jobs out of, some sense of beneficence. That is dystopian. The idea that you cannot make ends meet without being in service to some vassal, some liege lord. We are already living in a techno-feudal state. So the idea then is, I don't want that. We should have a situation where you can tell any corporation, get lost, where you can tell any corporation, take a hike. I don't need you. My income is derived from capital assets. And some of those capital assets are under the custodianship of the government. And some of those capital assets are under the custodianship of myself, but not a corporation unless you want, it under a corporation. And so when people like Marc Andreessen talk about like, we must maintain, that it's a delusion that, we're going to fully automate stuff and we have to maintain the dignity of labor. you know, labor today is not very dignified. There was a story going around yesterday about an Amazon warehouse worker who died, literally died, keeled over on the warehouse floor. And the manager is like, we have quotas to meet. Don't look at the body. Like, literally told people, if it makes you uncomfortable, don't look at it. Like, that's the dystopian hellscape. We're already in it. There is no dignity in that. There's absolutely no dignity in that level of wage slavery. And I'm just going to use the term wage slavery because anyone who works at a warehouse until they keel over, that is slavery. I'm sorry. Like, who worked people to death like that? The Egyptians building the pyramids, the Chinese building the Great Wall. That is slavery. And so it's like whenever people say, oh, well, it's really dystopian and doomerist to say that we're going to automate away the need for human labor. No, it isn't. Keeping things as they are, keeping things in this current paradigm where you have to work until you drop dead, that is dystopian. That is doomerist. The only way out of this is through it, and through it means automating away the need for human labor. Now, of course, there's many, many dimensions you can say, well, what about this? What about the short term? What about making ends meet? What about household income? That's what post-labor economics is for. And so where I'll end this rant, and I didn't realize it was going to be this much of a rant, where I'll end this rant is to say that the Kickstarter for Labor Zero has 48 hours left. So if you want to jump in, any support would be great. We're already 500% funded with over 1,000 backers. The book is happening, but if you want to get in on the ground level, if you want to get in early and get some of the perks and the rewards, go check it out over on Kickstarter, and I'll see y'all later.